I knew something was off the moment my Outlook calendar pinged with a last-minute all-hands meeting. No subject line, just a start time and a Google Meet link, like some faceless demon was summoning the entire company to a virtual execution. My coffee hadn't even cooled. The morning sunlight hadn't made it past the cubicle walls. But Dylan, all 6'2" of nepotistic smugness, strolled into the room like he was auditioning for Succession, and we were all background props. Team, he said, clasping his manicured hands like a televangelist, we're entering a new era at Galvix Solutions, and with that comes necessary streamlining. Translation, someone's about to get axed, and the son of the CEO, who still says irregardless in meetings, is holding the damn cleaver. Then he did it. Right there. In front of 60 employees, 4 interns, and one poor soul eating yogurt in the back. Effective immediately, Dylan announced, eyes flicking to me like I was a typo he just found in a brochure, Patricia Stone's position will be absorbed. Her responsibilities will be reallocated across operations and legal. No warning, no HR, not even a pretense of professionalism. Just that word, absorbed, like I was a paper towel soaking up coffee, now being wrung out in front of everyone. I sat still for 3 full seconds, didn't blink, didn't breathe. My hand stayed folded, one knuckle swollen from a decade of stress typing. I stood up slow, dignified, calm. The kind of calm you only develop after spending 12 years fixing other people's messes without ever getting credit. He kept talking, something about agility and future focus, but all I heard was the sound of my badge access being revoked. It was a quiet ping in my inbox. Galvix employee ID 7453, deactivated. Security flanked me before I could log out. 2 guys I'd worked with for years, now suddenly unsure whether to make eye contact. Protocol, one of them mumbled. I didn't make a scene. I gathered my things, phone, a framed photo of my nephew, the ficus plant that was somehow still alive after 3 CIOs had come and gone. I even thanked Dylan. Good luck absorbing a decade of federal compliance, I said, sweet as saccharin but just sharp enough for him to glance up, uncertain. And then I walked. Through the sea of silence, down the hallway I'd practically built with my own late nights, skipped lunches, and 11 p.m. email marathons. I made it as far as the glass atrium when I heard the sound of dress shoes slapping tile. The board chairman, Henry Ellison, 80 years old if he was a day, liver-spotted hands shaking from a combo of Parkinson's and rage. He wasn't yelling, wasn't even walking fast, but his face was pale like he'd just seen his entire retirement dissolve in front of him. He didn't even look at me. He grabbed Dylan's father, the actual CEO, by the sleeve. His voice was low, dead serious. Get her back in this building, he whispered. Now, before she makes a phone call. The silence that followed felt like the whole office had stopped breathing. Let me pause here for a second. If you're already hooked, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and throw a like. 95% of folks listen without subscribing, and this little click helps our team keep sharing stories that twist like this one's about to. Seriously, thanks. Now back to it. Dylan smirked like it was a joke. She's a compliance officer, not a magician, he said. But Henry's hand didn't move. You just fired the one person who can keep our biggest contract alive, he said. That was the moment Dylan blinked. The moment a boy pretending to be a man realized he'd just knocked over a domino without checking what was at the other end of the line. I didn't say a word, didn't smirk. Just stood there, holding my ficus, while the men behind closed doors started to panic. Because what they didn't know, what they'd forgotten in their little boardroom shuffle of titles and ego stroking, is that I hadn't just worked at Galvix. I was Galvix, the bones of it, the code, the contingency clauses, the buried safeguards, and I'd spent the last decade making damn sure that if anyone tried to screw me over, I could take the whole building down with a signature. 3 hours after my very public firing, I was back in the building, no badge, no title, no desk, just a hastily scheduled apology lunch with the CEO and his prodigal son, held in the fake Olive Garden conference room we used to gaslight clients into thinking we were still solvent. The CEO, let's call him Brad, because of course his name is Brad, war that strained corporate grin executives deploy right before a lawsuit or liver failure. He opened with, Patricia, there's clearly been miscommunication. Dylan sat to his right, legs crossed like he'd just discovered ankles, sipping cold brew from a mason jar like it contained wisdom instead of oat milk. I'm still unclear what you do exactly, he said. But if it's about feelings, we're sorry. We value everyone's contributions. That's when I knew this meeting wasn't about regret. It was about optics. Damage control. Someone had whispered in Daddy's ear that firing the woman with half the company's compliance brain might not play well with auditors or shareholders. So I said nothing, not a single word. Just nodded, tilted my head like I was observing a chimpanzee try to do calculus. I let them talk. Let them try to put the toothpaste back in the grenade. Brad tried harder. Of course, we're happy to bring you on in an advisory capacity, Patricia. We're not too proud to admit mistakes. Let's collaborate on a smooth transition. I kept smiling, polite as Sunday church, while the part of me that had spent years staying late to rewrite garbage contracts these two had blindly signed started keeping score. Meanwhile, 2 floors below, the real storm was forming. A liaison from the Department of Defense, Claire, sharp as a scalpel and twice as cold, had just emailed our legal team. requesting signature from P. Stone for Q4 renewal on contract GRX 41. Response needed by COB. The panic didn't begin immediately. First, it started with confusion. The junior legal associate knew, probably still printing his resume on linen paper, wrote back, Patricia Stone is no longer with the company. Please advise. Claire replied, blunt as a brick, then you're in breach. Phones started ringing, one by one. Compliance, legal, finance. The contract had a clause Patricia had insisted on, a clause no one else remembered, much less understood, requiring her signature on all renewals. Not a role, not a title, her name. Because when you're the one building the system, you know exactly where to write your name in indelible ink. Back in the conference room, Dylan's phone buzzed 3 times in 30 seconds. His smirk faltered. Brad's smile began to twitch. I still hadn't said a word. Instead, I reached into my purse, pulled out a post-it note and scribbled one word on it. Clause 42. I slid it across the table like a blackjack hand with blood on it. Brad picked it up, blinked. This is the clause from GRX 41? Dylan leaned over, lips tightening. Why would you name a clause after yourself? I looked at him, calm as a corpse. Because I was trying to save the company from idiots. There it was. The shift, the recognition. Dawning realization that the woman they tried to discard like a stale donut was the only one keeping their billion-dollar pipeline from becoming a smoking crater. No yelling, no threats. Just a post-it note and a well-timed silence. In the hallway, people had stopped pretending not to eavesdrop. One tech guy I'd helped during the last system crash gave me a slow, reverent nod. The kind you give someone walking into court knowing they are about to make history. I stood, straightened my blazer. I'll let you boys figure out how to unscrew yourselves, I said. But next time you invite me to a meeting, maybe put my name on the damn agenda. As I left, Dylan muttered something about entitlement. I turned back, one foot already out the door. You confuse entitlement with knowing what I'm worth, I said. And what you're not. And then I was gone. The building didn't collapse that day, but it started shaking. You could feel it. In the eyes darting across spreadsheets, the hushed tones in compliance, the dozen little ways a company realizes its entire structure is held together by a woman they just tried to delete. But that was just the tremor. The quake hadn't hit yet. I didn't storm out. I drifted, like fog rolling back after a forest fire. My resignation wasn't spoken, it was understood. Dylan had made his play. Brad had fumbled the recovery, and I had already started writing the final act of this sad little corporate tragedy before they even realized the curtain had dropped. Back home, I poured myself a glass of boxed Merlot with the same hand that'd signed more compliance renewals than either of those fools had read in their lives. Sat down at my desk, still old oak, still creaky from a decade of elbows and stress, and logged into the system no one else remembered existed. Legacy Compliance Net was a Frankenstein of a platform, built on outdated architecture, patched together with duct tape and spite, but it worked. Worked better than the overpriced Saw S-Trash Dylan pushed on the team during his first strategy offsite. Legacy Compliance Net held everything. Documented audits, internal loophole patches, multi-agency overrides, and one very special access pathway signed off under the old CEO, Franklin, the only man in the building who ever truly understood what I did. Under licenses and ownership, it still read, Sole Maintainer Patricia Stone, no expiration, no handoff clause. I opened the terminal, ran one final script. Lock sys all X, true admin override, disable transfer auth, null. The system chirped once, then went dark. A sleeping dragon rolled over onto its gold. No one else could get in without me now. I leaned back, cracked my knuckles, and smiled, not a smug smile, not even satisfied, just done. The kind of smile you wear when you know your part of the job is over and someone else is about to trip over the mess they tried to pretend didn't exist. Then I sent one message. Encrypted, auto-deleting in 72 hours. Only one recipient. To Melissa Tate subject, contingency 9 body if they come asking, smile, then call me. Melissa had been my assistant for 7 years. She'd once caught a typo in a federal reporting doc at 11:59 p.m. and saved us a $200K fine. The girl had steel in her bones and post-it notes in her purse for emergencies. She'd know what to do. By midnight, the tremors started. First came the access errors. Compliance reports not pulling. Audit logs returning blank. Licensing flags triggering in the finance sandbox environment. Then the emails, first a trickle, then a flood. Urgent System 42 reporting failure. Action required contractual log not found. Escalation missing Q3 cert archive blocking renewal. I watched it all from my personal dashboard, still active because I never trusted IT to revoke me properly. You don't spend 12 years in a place like Galvix without building your own keys, hidden doors, back tunnels with brick walls only you can open. Dylan, predictably, tried to downplay it in Slack, sent some company-wide message about technical migration issues and temporary certification unavailability. The kind of phrasing that means absolutely nothing, but sounds like everything's under control. Spoiler, it wasn't. That legacy system housed all the hand-signed waivers and cross-departmental approvals Galvix had quietly relied on to stay operational during every single regulatory audit for the last 8 years. It was the duct-taped spine of the company. Now it was asleep, with me holding the alarm clock. I didn't gloat, that's not how this worked. I wasn't in this for revenge. Revenge is noisy, messy, and gets you sued. This was something different. This was insurance. I opened my laptop, searched one name, Rexel Compliance Solutions. Mid-tier rival, hungry, funded, ready, attached my resume with no fanfare, no cover letter, no beg, just the subject line, I built what they broke. That night, I slept like a brick in wet cement, heavy, still, untouchable. Galvix didn't know it yet, but the scaffolding was crumbling. And the man who couldn't figure out what I even did was about to find out the hard way what happens when you unplug the architect mid-blueprint. Let him call IT, let him call legal, hell, let him call Jesus. None of them had the keys, I did, and I had just locked the door. By Wednesday, Dylan's emails had lost their smug punctuation, and were the exclamation points and TED talk buzzwords. Now it was all ASAP, urgent, and looping in legal. He had that wide-eyed, cornered ferret look every time someone knocked on his door. It started with a quarterly client call that spiraled into a full-blown tantrum. The military contractor on the line, one of our largest, asked a simple question. Can you resend your Q3 documentation with the signed updates from Patricia Stone? Dylan fumbled. I'd said the docs were under review and Patricia was on extended leave. The rep paused, then responded flatly, so, you have no certified officer for this year's amendment. That's going in the record. The call ended with a quiet click. No goodbye, just a silence that smelled like smoke. Melissa, my former assistant, was the next casualty. She was let go the next morning, Dylan citing realignment, whatever the hell that meant. Probably she blinked wrong. Or maybe he noticed she stopped wearing heels to work the day after I left. He sent a memo to the company an hour later, riddled with nonsense phrases like organizational optimization and streamlined accountability. Translation, heads were rolling, and Dylan was swinging the sword with his eyes closed. Of course, the real irony was that the sword wasn't even his. It was mine. I'd built the processes. I'd written the templates. I designed the internal systems they now couldn't access without my admin key. Every move Dylan made was like trying to perform heart surgery using a toaster manual. Some poor soul from IT emailed me. His name was Paul, sweet kid, always brought those sad little Tupperware lunches that smelled like canned corn. He wrote, Miss Stone, hope you're well. We're trying to regenerate compliance chain reports from the legacy system. We've hit a wall. It says admin lockout. We didn't even know that was possible. Any advice appreciated. I didn't respond, but I did pour a second cup of coffee and click over to my new inbox. Rexel Compliance Solutions. My consulting agreement had arrived. I wasn't joining them per se. I was helping from the sidelines. They had a few contracts up for renewal, ones I had some, let's call it familiarity with. The best part. One of those contracts was a rebid of a subaward Galvix used to own. Used to? See, federal contractors talk. They drink together at the same grim hotel bars near airports. They trade horror stories over warm beer and peanuts about which companies forget their signatures, who still uses fax machines, and which new COOs fired the only person keeping the lights on. The whispers had started. Did you hear Patricia Stone's out? Wait, she built their entire decos structure, didn't she? I heard she's with Rexel now. That's bad news for Galvix. I stayed quiet, moved like a shadow in kitten heels, didn't post on LinkedIn. Didn't update a single title, but I started taking calls, quiet ones. A duty compliance officer I hadn't spoken to in 5 years messaged me, was going through the GRX archive and saw your initials on clause 42. Clever move. Responded with a smiley face and nothing else. Meanwhile, inside Galvix, Dylan tried to slap duct tape on a dam. He ordered IT to just rebuild the system. They couldn't. It wasn't a system, it was a labyrinth with my fingerprints in every corner. You couldn't rebuild it without tearing the walls down. He demanded alternatives. None existed. He offered bonuses to senior staff for transition assistance. Half of them ghosted. The COO's meetings became shorter, louder, more desperate. But here's the thing. This wasn't even the real collapse. This was just the scaffolding groaning before the fall. The financial team hadn't realized yet that without my monthly validation, 3 of their grant invoices were about to bounce back. Legal hadn't noticed that a signature request due next week would trigger a 14-day contract hold if unfulfilled. And Dylan? He still hadn't read clause 42. He thought he was dealing with a disgruntled employee. He didn't realize he declared war on the author of the rulebook. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger's for amateurs. I'd moved past that. Now I was just waiting. Because when the real hit came, I wanted to be front row, not to gloat, but to see how long it would take before they finally understood what not essential really looks like. The memo hit the boardroom like a dropped coffin. No salutation. No signature. Just 3 pages of distilled panic, delivered by courier in an unmarked envelope, and laid gently, almost reverently, on the center of the mahogany table like a landmine. Brad opened it first. He was mid-sentence, babbling something about investor confidence when his voice hitched, eyes scanning faster, face falling slower. Dylan, lounging at the end of the table like a prom king at a funeral, didn't even look up. Another vendor complaint, he said, sipping what I assumed was a third cold brew of the morning. No, said the chairman. One word, quiet, final. He'd been mostly silent for weeks, ever since the day he'd grabbed Brad in the atrium and hissed that warning. Since then, he'd been watching. Listening. The old predator in the herd who knows when the grass has gone quiet for a reason. Now he read the memo again, out loud this time. Clause 42. In the event of involuntary termination or removal of Miss Patricia Stone from any compliance oversight role connected to contract GRX 41, and in the absence of a 90-day advisory transition, the agreement is rendered non-compliant and subject to immediate audit and pause. Reinstatement requires full documentation reviewed by the original signatory or an authorized due liaison. Silence. Brad turned ashy. Dylan scoffed. They won't enforce that, Dylan said. Nobody enforces those boilerplate clauses. It's legal fluff. It's just decoration. The chairman didn't answer. He just turned the page, revealing a timestamp footnote. Addendum B, this clause was authored and inserted by Ms. Stone on July 17, 2019. Signed and initialed by then CEO Franklin Hayes and countersigned by due contract liaison C. Remick. Franklin, the old guard. Dead 2 years now, but still haunting the halls in the form of signatures and smart decisions no one fully understood until they went missing. Who the hell is Remick? Dylan asked. Brad whispered, Claire Remick, Department of Defense liaison. She used to be on every quarterly call with us. She and Patricia, they had history. Meanwhile, at a quiet cafe just 3 blocks from the Pentagon, I was sitting across from Claire herself. She wore the same navy blazer she always did. Her badge clipped low so only the paranoid or observant would notice. Her voice was low, deliberate. They tried to scrub Clause 42, she said, sipping herbal tea like she wasn't discussing the nuclear option. The request came through 2 weeks ago from someone on Dylan's team. Said it was outdated language. I denied it. I smiled. You always did have good instincts. Claire raised an eyebrow. You want to go nuclear, Trish? Because this clause could freeze their accounts. Immediately, I shook my head. Not yet. I want to see how close they get to the edge before they start yelling for guardrails. She leaned back, appraising me like a chessboard. And if they don't yell, I set my spoon down gently. Then I let them fall. Back at Galvix, legal had begun the slow, panicked unraveling. One associate tried to call Franklin's estate lawyer for clarification, only to be told the original clause was stored in physical archive, locked, and only accessible with prior authorization or court order. Another tried to contact Claire. She ignored the call, and someone, my money's on Brad, ordered a full audit of all contracts with my name in them. There were a lot. Meanwhile, I forwarded my meeting notes to Rixel. Just a brief, Clause 42 confirmed intact. Enforcement risk high. Recommendation, prepare to absorb subcontract if breach confirmed. No emotion, no flourish, just cold facts. Dylan still believed he was in control. Still thought this was a PR hiccup. But control isn't a title. It's not inherited. It's earned in quiet rooms over late nights, in the invisible lines of text that no one reads until everything breaks. I hadn't pulled the trigger yet, but I'd loaded the gun, set it on their conference table, and watched to see who would reach for it first. They thought the storm had passed. What they didn't know was that Clause 42 wasn't a thunderclap. It was a fuse, and someone had just lit the match. The letter came certified, thick paper, watermarked, no nonsense, delivered by a courier wearing sunglasses indoors like the sun had anything to do with the fire he was about to drop in their laps. It was stamped official notification, federal compliance breach investigation. Not a warning, not a request, an announcement. Galvix Solutions was now formally under review for breach of contract on GRX 41. Effective immediately, all pending payments were frozen, all renewal privileges suspended. Audit access requested within 72 hours. Finance read it first. You could hear the blood drain from the room through the walls. Legal read it second. 3 paralegals walked out for coffee and never came back. Dylan read it last. At first, he laughed. Because of course he did. That nervous frat boy chuckle he always defaulted to when he didn't understand the gravity of something. But then he flipped to the second page and saw the section header in bold. Clause 42 Enforcement Patricia Stone named condition of compliance. And under that, just one line in due D block text. Where is Miss Stone? That's when the panic clicked in. An emergency video call was scheduled within the hour. Not with internal teams, no. This one was external. The client. A full panel of federal reps, all with that dry, bureaucratic stare that makes you feel like a child trying to explain why you flooded the basement. Dylan wore his tie crooked and his confidence thinner than the toner in their broken printer. A woman in glasses opened the meeting. We've reviewed your internal documentation. Clause 42 appears to have been violated. Your system certifications are inactive. Your compliance officer was removed without transition protocol. Dylan opened his mouth to respond, but she cut him off. Let me be clear, this is not negotiable. The only reason your funding hasn't been clawed back is because Miss Stone's past performance gave us pause. She held your system together longer than our tolerance ever allowed. So I'll ask again, she leaned forward. Where is Miss Stone? Dead silence. Brad shifted in his chair. Dylan muttered something about her being in a different phase of her career. Another rep chimed in. Then we'll be initiating suspension protocol. Expect site visits and a hold on all current payments. This includes retroactive freeze for Q3 invoices until reviewed. Wait, Brad started. Can we reach out to her? Has she agreed to return in any formal capacity? Brad glanced at Dylan. Dylan looked at the wall. No, Brad admitted, she hasn't. And don't waste our time. Click. The call ended without ceremony. Brad reached for his phone, hands shaking like a man dialing his ex at 2 a.m. He tried once, straight to voicemail, tried again. Same, he sent a text. Patricia, please, just a call, let's talk, no reply. Across town, I was in a different meeting. No video, no suits, just coffee, notepad. In a quiet room with a lawyer from Rixel and a procurement officer from a sister agency looking to reroute service contracts if Galvix couldn't right their ship. I didn't gloat, I didn't smile. I simply laid out what I knew, what systems were failing, what audits would find, what the breach language really meant. You built this structure yourself? The procurement officer asked. From the ground up, I said. I wrote every protocol, every clause, including the one they ignored. You're not open to returning? I already did my job, I said. They were the ones who left the door open during a storm. Later that evening, I watched as Galvix's stock took its first stumble, small but noticeable. Forums started buzzing. Clients whispered. Partners paused communications. And still, I didn't call back. I wasn't being petty. I was being exact. This was the moment I designed years ago, not out of malice, but out of survival. Because I knew eventually some slick-haired legacy brat would assume the system could run without the woman who had built it. They'd stripped my name from the directory. Now they were begging for it on legal documents. Control isn't about noise, it's about leverage. Quiet, precise leverage. And in that moment, phone buzzing, boardroom melting, I finally had all of it. And I had never felt quieter or more untouchable. 3 years before Dylan ever strutted into the building with his fresh MBA and frat boy cologne, I sat across from Franklin Hayes, the old CEO, while he stirred sugar into a chipped mug that probably hadn't been washed since the Bush administration. It was just the two of us in his office, the air thick with the scent of copier toner and something dying inside the HVAC. I remember the words I chose that day. I'd rehearsed them. Sir, I know he's your son, I said, gently, but this company doesn't need a prince, it needs a spine. Franklin didn't blink, just kept stirring his coffee like the spoon was the only thing holding him together. I'm not putting him anywhere near federal work, he finally muttered. I've watched that boy struggle to alphabetize paperclips. We made a pact that day, unwritten but absolute. He agreed to list me by name as a non-removable compliance officer on every major deal. Not just title, name. Not because I like you, he grumbled. Because I'm terrified of losing you. And now, that same line, buried in contracts, etched into terms, ghost signed on 100 PDFs, was gutting the company from the inside out. The chairman finally saw it. He'd spent weeks watching the ship take on water, assuming it was an IT leak, or a vendor dispute, or maybe just one of Dylan's many blunders. But now, he stood in the war room, walls plastered with contract printouts and redacted memos, and finally understood the shape of the crater they'd created. He turned to Brad. You didn't just fire a compliance officer. You removed the last load-bearing wall from a house built entirely on liability. Brad's response was a shaky breath. Dylan's was another cold brew, and a muttered boomers panicked too much. But outside their little imploding kingdom, the world had noticed. Rixel posted a teaser on their homepage that afternoon. Simple, understated, need transition support? Experienced compliance officers available for short-term federal realignment. The font was Helvetica. The message was a missile, because people in this industry knew what that meant. They knew I was with Rixel now, and they knew that if Patricia Stone was working elsewhere, Galvix was bleeding credibility faster than they could file press releases. I didn't post anything, didn't tweet, didn't update my network, but the old guard saw it. Former partners forwarded the teaser to their contacts. Procurement officers quietly shifted their posture in contract meetings. Even Claire, my due friend, texted me a screenshot of the post with 3 words, "That'll do, Stone." At Galvix, the panic matured into full-blown chaos. Legal had drafted a memo outlining potential clawbacks, backdated penalties, and missed certifications. The dollar figure before penalties was already in the high 7 figures. A finance VP ran the numbers twice, then excused herself to the stairwell and cried. And yet Dylan still didn't get it. Still blamed the system, as if it were some wild animal that bit without warning. The chairman stood during the emergency board meeting that night. I was here before Franklin, he said, his voice low but heavy. I remember when we had one building and a single contract. I remember when this company mattered, when people built things here instead of breaking them with egos and family favors. He looked directly at Dylan. You broke the contract, you broke the trust, and worst of all, you broke the part of the machine that fixed things when people like you screwed up. No one spoke. Because what do you say when the oldest man in the room finally calls time of death? Patricia Stone wasn't coming back. Not to save them, not to patch the wounds. She was already helping someone else take their place. And the board finally, painfully realized she hadn't just left. She'd moved on, and Galvix, it was running out of time and rope. The final emergency board meeting was scheduled for 8:00 p.m. on a Thursday, prime time for corporate begging. They used the executive war room this time, not because it had better acoustics or screens, but because it was the only one with a lock on the inside. Brad looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. His tie was crooked, his hairline receding by the minute, and his voice was cracking in places he used to use for confidence. We just need her back, even temporarily. Something, anything. The general counsel cleared her throat and opened a folder. Inside was a copy of my exit agreement, revised last year when I'd renegotiated after handling a dual agency breach without asking for a raise. She read it aloud for the record. In the event of involuntary separation without documented cause, the employee reserves the right to waive all non-compete obligations, consult with industry competitors, and re-engage in federal compliance work without restriction. Brad blinked. That was in her file. She added it during the reorg, she said flatly. You signed it, sir. Across the table, Dylan flinched like someone had just slapped him with a subpoena. She was head of compliance. Why would she even want a non-compete? The general counsel didn't answer. She just closed the folder like she was sealing a tomb. Then, right on cue, the speakerphone chirped. Brad had been trying to reach me all day. I'd ignored every call, every message. But this time, he'd looped in the board. This time, he was desperate enough to put it all on speaker. Patricia, Brad said, it's Brad. I know things ended poorly, but we need you. This isn't about pride, it's about the company. You built this place. Please just talk to us, dead air. Dylan didn't mean click. I didn't answer because I was watching, from a distance. I had a live feed, an old IT test login they never bothered to revoke. No camera, just minutes and audio, enough to know who was squirming. Dylan trying to shift blame like it was confetti. She was never transparent. She hoarded knowledge. This is what happens when you let legacy staff dictate modernization? Brad, voice rising. You let your ego override her warnings. She told you in writing that Clause 42 was untouchable. You called it old school nonsense. Legal whispered, we're already getting feelers from Rixel. They know we're vulnerable. The chairman stood slowly, like a man too tired to scream. She didn't hoard knowledge, he said. She protected it from people like you. You didn't lose Patricia Stone. You pushed her into the arms of the competition. Dylan leaned back, crossed his arms, and said, you're all just scared of her. The chairman nodded once, you're damn right. Meanwhile, I sat at home with my feet up, sipping a cup of chamomile like a Bond villain in orthopedic slippers. My phone buzzed again. Brad, again, I silenced it. Let him stew. Let them all stew, because now they knew I hadn't left them vulnerable. Had simply stopped holding up the roof, and the leaks were theirs to mop. I'd already moved on. Already helped Rixel draft 3 new compliance frameworks with language twice as ironclad. I wasn't angry, wasn't even smug. I was serene, untouchable. And for the first time in a decade, I was done cleaning up after people who didn't know the difference between liability and legacy. Galvix had chosen chaos. I was just letting it run its course. The ballroom was packed. Suits, ties, pearls, and fake smiles stretched across 100 faces trying to look confident while the foundation cracked beneath their imported loafers. Quarterly shareholder meetings at Galvix used to be celebratory affairs, mild wine, stale shrimp, a slideshow of inflated graphs nobody questioned. But this one buzzed with something else, fear wearing a name tag. Brad stood at the podium, visibly trying not to sweat through his collar. His voice, once buttery smooth, now grated like gravel through a paper shredder. We're actively resolving the compliance issue and working with all necessary stakeholders, he announced, eyes darting like prey in a petting zoo full of wolves. Dylan was there too, flanked by 2 security guards pretending not to be security guards. He tried to smirk, tried to carry that old swagger, but his hands wouldn't stop fidgeting with the cuff of his overpriced blazer. And then the doors opened. No announcement, no trumpet, just heels against tiles, soft and certain. I walked in, not in my old Galvix blazer, not with my badge, not as a ghost returning for closure, but as the head of compliance for Rixel Federal Solutions, and behind me, 2 members of the Department of Defense procurement team. Quiet, watchful, carrying clipboards and expressions like funerals. I didn't look for a seat. I didn't need one. I walked straight to the front row where the new vendor announcements were being made. The projector clicked. The slide changed. GRX 41 transition partner, Rixel Federal Solutions. You could hear the oxygen leave the room. Brad's jaw unhinged. Dylan blinked like a man who'd just seen the house he built flipped upside down and turned into an Arby's. The chairman saw me and for the first time in months smiled, not wide, not grateful, just relieved. I nodded once, no gloating, just confirmation. Rixel had secured the contract, the biggest one. The one Galvix was betting the next 3 quarters on, and they'd lost it not because I sabotaged them, but because I simply moved on. They didn't lose to revenge, they lost to relevance. A murmur spread through the shareholders. Phones came out, tweets were drafted. Calls were already being made to sell shares before the market digested the blood in the water. Brad stepped off the podium, walked straight to me. Face pale, voice trembling. Patricia, we can talk. There's still a way to, I cut him off with a smile. Tell your next assistant to read the fine print. Behind him, the guards placed a gentle but firm hand on Dylan's shoulder. Sir, you've been asked to leave, one said. For what? Dylan hissed. Violation of internal fiduciary policy and breach of oversight. Board vote was unanimous. He turned to Brad. You promised. Brad wasn't looking at him anymore. I didn't stay. I didn't need to. My presence had done what 12 months of warnings couldn't. I turned, walked out the same way I came in. No confetti, no champagne, just a quiet satisfaction. The kind that comes from watching the empire you helped build finally acknowledge that you were never just a cog. You were the blueprint. And now, you were the competition. Let them rebuild. Let them scramble. I had already rewritten the rules. And this time, my name was on every single line. Appreciate you sticking around, you legends of the break room. Subscribe for more chaos. Let's make your old managers spill their coffee in fear.